trying to think if there are any 60 songs that have sanctuary in it.
Sanctuary.
I wanted to sing a
Park.
song.
I mean, that's a park.
Hey, what's that?
I don't know why that came to my mind. I really don't. It just did.
Yeah, now you got that tune going through MacArthur's Park. Oh my goodness gracious! So I found a new group, new to me group that I absolutely I can't stop listening to them.
All right, I'm ready.
They're twins, and they're called Mona Lisa Twins, and Mona is one sister, Lisa is the other. And that's why they're called Mona Lisa Twins. And they cover 60 songs, primarily Beatles songs.
Is that right? They live in your senior adult condo or what?
No, they're in their 20s. You got to listen to. We had a staff meeting, and I played a clip for the team yesterday, Church Answers team. And I got to tell you, the team has not been the same since I heard that clip.
I'll take your word for it. Okay.
Mona Lisa Twins. Hey, I don't know why I said that. I just had that going through my mind. We're talking about something totally different. We're talking about what do you do if you have a worship center or a sanctuary that you are no longer using or that you're using minimally, happening in different churches right now. So we want to talk about the usage of space. And Mark, you've seen it in so many occasions. I mean, Warnell Road had how many and how much capacity when you?
Yeah, we had 610 because that's what the fire code occupancy sign said when you walked in. So you knew how many were supposed to be there, and then you could do the math and figure out how many did show up that week. So it was a constant reminder that we were missing the mark. No. So many churches, we've talked about this, they built to be 20 or 30% bigger than their highest attendance Sunday one year. And, and they didn't fill it up. And it's a long story there. But so many churches built sanctuaries much bigger than they really needed.
Right.
Man, I just don't know how many churches I've seen that have sanctuaries too small. I mean, it's almost always the other way around, especially older churches. And so, yeah. And someone said it's kind of like a guy who goes on a diet, loses 300 pounds, but he doesn't change his clothes. He's still wearing the same big old clothes. that's how it's kind of like that, you know.
I've heard so many Cliftonisms. That's a new one for me.
Yeah.
You
could use it in your next book.
It'll be somewhere. As many books as I've written, who knows it may already be there. Here's what I'm seeing, Mark, as we talk to our Church Answers clients. We're seeing a number of them that have moved out of the sanctuary, and they moved into a fellowship hall, or they moved into the gym or the family life center, and they're basically just letting the sanctuary sit because it is too big for them. So we'll talk specifically about those churches, but we can talk about a lot of things related to facilities. Got a few points here. The first one is just know what your facilities are. Do an evaluation of the physical condition of the sanctuary building and see what kind of shape it's in, how it can be used. I was talking to a design build firm, Brown, in Nebraska, and they were telling me that's what they're doing more and more. They're going in and evaluating and saying, here's the condition of it before you think about how you're going to use it. Many churches do not know how much deferred maintenance, how much dangerous issues are present. So, take the opportunity to do evaluation of it, even if it's a DIY, do-it-yourself evaluation.
Yeah, that's obviously important. And in this day and age, you can join some Facebook groups, pastors' Facebook groups. I'm on several of them, and guys will say, "Hey, send me some pictures of what you've done with your sanctuary, how you've reconfigured it and redone." You get all kinds of great photos and ideas on how to reconfigure. Because basically, a lot of our sanctuaries look pretty much the same. They're kind of like big bowling alleys with pews up and down the middle. And so, I mean, how do you make those things look more appropriate for a congregation, half that size? I'm at Linwood now. I haven't mentioned that yet this morning, but, I mention it a lot. So I'm glad to be there. It's a great
Absolutely.
little church. The coolest thing about it was when we went there, the building's only 4,000 square feet and the sanctuary seats about 85 people. And so we run about 60 now, and we feel like we're blowing the doors off. So
you are blowing the doors off.
Yeah. But when I was at Warnell Road, it took us a year or two to get from 18 people to 60. but when we were at 60, we could still seat another 550. And so it's still, seriously, Thom, it was like, it's nice to have a building that is appropriately sized for the congregation, because the congregation is 60 to 80 people that love Jesus and live in the neighborhood. That's a good congregation. But if they happen to be in a building that seats 600, that's a tough spot. And so, yeah, it's important to reconfigure that worship space and not leave that many vacant pews every single week.
Hey, Mark, Sam and I did a webinar yesterday. Now, that's irrelevant as far as the listeners and viewers are, because yesterday when we released this and then all that, but on my calendar yesterday, and we had over 1,500 people registered for the webinar. I mean, it was just interesting. The topic was how to increase attendance. That's it. I mean, you talk about a complex, just, man, what kind of cutting edge topic are you going to talk about? How to increase attendance. So there's a lot of people wanting to fill the room.
Well, that's another webcast, podcast, whatever, for another day. Sometimes they need to take care of the ones they got before they bring any new ones on. But that's another story for another day. No, I think looking at your building and trying to figure out the best use of it, not only for you, we've talked about this for years, Dr. Rayner, but for the community. If you can't use that sanctuary, if you don't need that much space, is there something that the community could use it for? Is there some other? And again, I agree. Get an outside person to come in, set some eyes on it, ask some other pastors who've done that kind of thing. A lot of guys have already done that kind of evaluation. Learn from them. Basically, though, you need to get some of your lay folks involved, because if you as the pastor decide we're going to change the sanctuary, that's probably not going to go very well unless the church is just you and your wife. And even then, it might not. So
there may be
you better bring some people along, and don't do this on your own.
Then, if you have moved out of the sanctuary, you have just declared that it's too big, that we don't have the funds to reconfigure it, or there's not the desire, we're going to start worshiping in the gym, fellowship hall, chapel, whatever the case may be. This is an opportunity for another church to use the space. It's still an opportunity for another church to use the space, and even if you are using that space.
Yeah, absolutely. There are all kinds of new churches that need buildings. There are all kinds of language congregations that need buildings. And, man, you can let that place be an incubator for church plants and just let them incubate in there and get started and then launch off. There's all kinds of ways. Do not let that big empty sanctuary set empty and never be used. I see that so often. I do, really. The church I was a part of helped transition. They were meeting in an adult Sunday school classroom or department room, that seated about 60 people. And the sanctuary, which seated about 500, just sat empty. Eventually, there was a congregation, a Haitian congregation, that desperately needed a building. And so they let the Haitians use the sanctuary, and they used the Sunday school space. It was a great partnership. So those kinds of things are quite possible and really kingdom focused and a really good use of the space.
So, Mark, when I was in college, I don't think it was technically prehistoric, but it wasn't too much long after that I went to college, and I got a major in finance, got my degree in business administration, but I got 2 accidental minors. My accidental minors is I enjoyed the courses so much that I kept taking them in the free elective section instead of, I took them in the free elective section. So they, right before I graduated, I did my graduation check. And they said, by the way, do you know you have 2 minors? I said, no, I didn't. They said, yeah, you've taken so many economics courses and so many statistics courses that you are eligible for minors. The only thing that I took that was kind of a give me, I took elementary typewriting, pass fail. Now, don't judge me. Don't judge me. I did not know how to use a keyboard. I mean, can you imagine how I would be using a keyboard today if I hadn't taken elementary typewriting? The challenge was I was the only non-football player at Alabama who was in the class.
Is that right?
That's right. Now, there's a purpose to my story. You probably
I'm listening.
Where is Rayner going with this? Well, there's a purpose to my story. I loved economics, and Economics 101, when you take that course, probably the first or second lesson is going to be the supply-demand curve, where supply and demand meet. Now, here's what's going on with church space.
Okay.
sanctuary and other space. We got a lot of supply out there because churches are smaller, but we also have a lot of demand of people who don't have facilities. And the more that we can get that curve meeting, the supply and demand curve, which is the intersection point when you do economics 101, the more we will be using kingdom space for kingdom reasons with kingdom motives. So I love the idea of welcoming another church to use that space. That's my
Right.
little lecture on my college experience, Mark. I'm
Well,
sorry I
you
digress,
know,
but you digress a lot, so I get to every now and then.
there you go. However, a caveat. Again,
Yes.
you can't just like back the dump truck up to the congregation and unload this on them and say, hey, this precious worship space that we've loved and cherished, and every pew has a name plaque on it, and the organ and the piano has a name plaque on it, and you were married here, and your mother and father had their funeral here. We're going to let some outside people come in and use this. You probably got to prepare them for that.
That's a good word, Mark.
And you got to help them understand the glory of God in all of this, and it could take some time. And I have experienced pastors who've rushed to that too quickly and created a
Good word.
win-lose scenario too quickly, and the people shut it down and say, no, you're not going to do that. Well, now you've got a real problem. So think through that a little bit and be a little more cautious and reach out and get some help from other guys who've done it. And how do I communicate this to my church, and how do I bring them along? Because for a pastor, it may be just like you said, it's just a supply and demand. It makes sense. Let's let somebody use it. But I promise you, there are people in that church that would have an emotional problem with sharing that. It'd be like somebody opening up in your home and to people you don't know and all that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you, I've been down that road with a lot of pastors who move too quickly at that point.
It's a good caveat. It's a good caution. Well said. Whether you have too much space or not, you can really use your worship center, your sanctuary, whatever you call it, for the community. Every church I've been in, except my first church, we would get requests from the community to use our sanctuary for preschool graduations or some type of public school event. And unless there was a compelling reason, we would always say yes, because that's a valuable gathering space that most organizations, schools, nonprofits, whatever, don't have. And you got to have a policy, but open up that building so you can connect with the community.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, music is a really important part. All kinds of recitals and concerts that high schools might need to do, small colleges, community colleges, those kinds of things. We were at Warnell. We were pretty close to the University of Missouri of Kansas City. And we just let it be known that any student that needed a place to do a recital could use our sanctuary. Not that they were going to fill it up, but it had good acoustics and it was a good place. And so we had a number of people who did that. We also found some really good music groups that did all kinds of, unique historic music. I remember it was a group that played instruments that were made during the Civil War. They weren't the original ones, but they made instruments like were made during the Civil War, and they played music and songs to that time period. I didn't think it would be that big a deal, but they wanted a place to meet, so we let them use our church, and we put out some banners and stuff like that. And all these people from the city that love historic music all showed up and had a big crowd. I mean, one of the biggest crowds we'd had up to that point. You just don't know, but just be creative and realize we got this big space that the community can use for a variety of things. Man, we need people in here. And by the way, every time we had something like that, I had all kinds of information about our church in every seat. I didn't put it in the pew back. I put it in the pew. So people had to pick it up when
they're not going to get it out of the pew back, are they?
No. And it was actually that concert with the Civil War music. About 2-3 weeks later, this kid calls me and he says, my mom, she likes that kind of music. She was at your church and she came home with this flyer about how your church does things like plant churches. I've been interested in planting a church. And long story short, that led to one of our first, church planters and all that kind of stuff. So there you go. You never know, right? Yep.
Wow. I can see Mark Clifton's next book, From the Civil War to the 21st Century Church Plant. That isn't exactly what you said, but
That's all right.
Nevertheless, I speak in hyperbole. Sometimes, particularly if you have chairs, this can happen. You can configure a sanctuary to a small group place, several small groups. We actually did that in the one church where I served as pastor. we ran out of small group space because we're more of a traditional Sunday school model where all of our small groups were meeting on Sunday morning. But we did not have education space, classroom space to meet the growth that we had. And so immediately after one of our services, didn't take much moving of the chairs, but in came a lot of panels and, dividing panels, not perfectly acoustical. There was always a murmur going on because there was no ceiling over them, but it did well for a season. I know that's not an option with a lot of churches, but it is a possibility. I don't know what we would have done without it. I mean, we would have had to go to an extra time for Sunday school, which would have been a challenge for us.
Well, if you're thinking about how to make your worship area appropriately sized for the congregation you have. And again, I know we're talking to a lot of guys whose their congregation, their worship center will seat 300, 400, and they're closer to 100 in attendance. That's just incredibly common. You and I both talked about the fact that in our denomination, my denomination, Southern Baptist, the median church size is 70. So half the churches are 70 or below. A lot of those churches that are 70 or below have congregation buildings that are 250 and above. I promise you. And so when I went to Warnell, again, just to use that as a continuing example, we grew to about 150, but still the sanctuary seated 610. Well, what are you going to do about that? Well, in this case, they didn't want to remove the pews because it was a very architecturally historic building built in 1921 in a very architecturally informed neighborhood. People bought those homes because of the architecture. So as we were growing and reaching new people, we asked just the new folks, the new young couples that had joined, we asked them, what would you like to do with the sanctuary? Would you like us to remove the pews and bring in chairs? And Dr. Rayner, it was 100% don't take the pews out because they bought homes in that neighborhood for the architectural uniqueness and the idea that we would destroy the they didn't want that. However, you can't have 600. So what we did was we took out every other pew. So everybody got a bulkhead seat, got a lot of space there. And we cut down off of the ends. We cut 3 foot off the end of each pew and then put the ends back on. And so we cut down the size of the pew, which made our aisles double wide, which was fine because back in the 1920s, the aisles were really narrow. So the aisles were made hugely wide. We double spaced, and then we took 3 or 4 rows out of the front and about 5 or 6 rows out of the back. And then in the back, we could serve food and things like that. And we reduced the seating to about 300. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, 150 and 300, that's not that bad. It didn't look that bad. I remember the first Sunday I came in there after we reduced it, I felt like our church had doubled in size. It did so feel exciting. That way. Like, wow, this looks great. And but every now and then we'd have a concert. I would do a bluegrass concert and we'd have, 400 or 500 people in there. We had a couple of funerals of young people that were packed. We were still able to bring in chairs and fill up that space. So we could still get 600 people in there by bringing in chairs. Yeah. So we still had that ability, but on a weekly basis, 300 was what we were. So sometimes you just cut down your pews, take some of them out, take some out the back, make a coffee area at the back, put a little bookstore thing, not a bookstore, but a book display thing back there. All kinds of things you can do with that space to make it more appropriate.
I love that. I've got a pastor I'm talking to about his space. I think I'm going to make it original with me. No, I'll give you credit, Mark. But I'm going to talk to him about that. I love that idea. Another idea: partner with a nonprofit organization, whether you are packed or whether you have a lot of space. My son Sam, Sam, pastor of West Bradenton in Florida. And Sam's church said yes to a Christian school in the area. Bradenton Christian School is a growing Christian school, but they were running out of space. They asked to move their entire preschool to the church. And so pre-K and K are now at his school, I presume 5 days a week. I wouldn't think otherwise. And they have a natural assembly hall called the Sanctuary. So, that's just one example of a church saying, hey, we're really not using the space except on Sunday mornings. What can we do with it? So that's another alternative.
Absolutely. All kinds of things. Just be as creative as you can possibly be. And I do want to emphasize strongly because having been through this, the corporate worship is greatly enhanced when your worship center is more appropriately sized to the congregation. You're closer physically. You can hear each other sing better. Again, there's just something about that I can attest makes it much better. So, encourage you strongly to look at readjusting your and even when we did it at Warnell, I had a few people say, "Well, what happens if we grow?" Well, then we can put the pews back. We're not shrinking the building size. We're just making an adjustment to the seating size. So, I just want to again strongly encourage you to do that.
Mark, what we're going to do in episode 270, an episode that will follow shortly, we're going to talk about combining worship services. It's the same principle. It's filling the room more. It goes against conventional wisdom, where the conventional wisdom is always more services instead of fewer. However, I'm seeing some success at all of that. We'll hold that conversation and ask the listeners and the viewers to come back in episode 270. So we're at Revitalize and Replant. I'm Thom Rainer. I'm with Mark Clifton, the international harvester, church planner type person. And we will be back and come back in episode 270. I think you'll love it. It'll just follow right along with this theme. We'll see you then.